Hey friends, welcome back to Unpolished by Cult. I'm Catherine Schaefer, your host. Today's episode is going to be maybe a little heavier. We'll see where it goes. But I wanted to talk about something that was a little closer to my heart. First thing first, we're going to talk a little bit about a book I wrote, Beauty for Ashes, Walking Through Grief with God. Just because it seems to be something seems to be surrounding me the last couple weeks. Just grief in different forms. Well, not just a couple weeks, even just this last month. A few people around me have been dealing with grief, and it's hard. Grief is one of those things that it's just not a one and done, right? It's not something that um, happens once and it's come and gone and you get over. So it's today's episode is definitely going to be a little bit different. I wrote the book almost a year ago. If you know any part of my story, or if you've gone to any of my older episodes in my Evergreen catalog, you might have heard some of my story. My mom passed away. Oh my goodness. This August will be, um, wow, 4 years? I don't even know. It feels like yesterday. Um, my mom passed away very suddenly, of cancer. One minute she was fine, it seemed. The next minute she went in with some back pain, and 3 months later she was gone. Um, so it was very sudden. The decline was very sudden. So we didn't have much time, and my mom was one of those moms that didn't ever want to burden her children. So she kept everything very secret of how bad the cancer was. She didn't let us in on how bad it was. We didn't find out that it was stage 4 until after she passed. She always made it sound like she had years to live. She had surgery, she went through chemo, she gave us the impression that she had lots of time left with us and her grandchildren. And we actually didn't find out because she just didn't want us to grieve beforehand. But I'm just going to let you all know, if you are going through that and you have children, please don't do that. Um, because I think that is harder. And I mean, I don't want to tell you how to live your life, or how to do things, but from somebody who's been on the side of not knowing, I'd rather have my mom tell me that she had stage 4 cancer and she only had 3 months to live, or a month to live, than she be gone literally in a blink of an eye, and being told that she had years to live, which I think was much harder on all of us. So, um, with that being said, um, I have gone back through and read my own book, just because it's been a while. And I've gone back through and read some of my own books that I wrote. It's kind of been a nice little walk through memory lane, and because sometimes we forget what we're supposed to learn from, especially when we're writers. We write things, and we put them off to the side and we move on to the next project. And there's a reason God leads us to write things, especially if we're not just writing novels, but we're writing, devotionals, or we're writing, living, breathing books, that are meant to teach us things. And those are things that we're supposed to constantly learn from. It's things like that. So I've gone back through and readdressed some things, and so today's episode is going to be kind of walking back through memory lane. So I'm hoping that I can keep my emotions in check. We will see how that goes. I wrote some notes down of things that I did want to talk about, because otherwise I'm just flipping through pages, and you know how my squirrely brain goes. There were some lines there that I felt that I know I didn't write for me necessarily, that I was meant to write for other people that read the book. That God wanted me to write for other people, which I think is beautiful in itself. Um, because not everything that I write I know is for me. A lot of things I wrote were meant for me to learn from, but I think a lot of things I wrote were also meant for other people to help them in their journey. Um, so today I just want to read some of those things. So I want to start with something very slow. So the first thing that I wrote, um, that is, the world didn't stop the day my mother died, but mine did. So obviously there's something about that line that doesn't need explaining, because if you've had your mom pass, you know how that feels. You've lived it, you've experienced it, but it hits different. Um, you felt that sentence before you ever heard it. Like you know how that feels. Um, and then there's another line that I wrote: grief hit me like a wave I didn't see coming, and before I knew it, I was drowning. No one tells you, no one warns you how quickly it hits you. It literally feels like a tidal wave. Because one moment you're standing, see, and I should have brought Kleenex with me. Because one moment you're standing, and the next you're trying to breathe underwater and act like you're fine, because your world has stopped, but the rest of the world is still moving. And if you're dealing with grief, and not just a loss of a mother, but a loss of any kind, and it doesn't matter who it is, it could be your best friend, somebody you're close to, a family member, and it doesn't matter who it is. You know, that line probably resonates with you. Um, and I know, um, it does with me. Um, and I can say there's literally moments, even now, I can recall where, um, it came in waves, and it was like moments where I would be fine. Sorry. I would be fine. I would be doing something. I would be out, because I had to deal with my mother's estate, and I was dealing with a lot of things with my brother, and doing the paperwork and all that kind of stuff, and funeral service and things like that. So I was able to kind of, box everything into different compartments, and kind of just put everything away. I'm very good at doing those things, and keeping things into check. And but this was different. It was like, it would almost like I could keep it in check, but it would escape almost, and it would hit so hard, um, and it would just knock me flat on my butt, um, and it felt like I was drowning. Um, and there was the next line that really sorry, I just need a minute. The next line that I think really, um, took my breath away, and I actually spoke about this with, somebody who's grieving, um, not that long ago, I actually mentioned this. So this line I wrote, grieving without God nearly broke me, but grieving with him began to restore me. So, so my mother passed away before I was saved. So, um, and I mentioned that, um, I grieved almost twice for my mother. So I grieved once as an unsaved person, and it's grief when you're not saved. It looks different, I realized. I realized it after being saved that you grieve differently. Like I didn't really, I wrote it, but I don't think I fully understood what I wrote until I looked back on it. Like I really, because I was still in the grief. This book really helped me actually with my grief because it helped me heal. This book actually walked me through my grief with God. Um, because I'd only grieved as a secular person, as somebody who was unsaved. And it looks differently. And I can't explain what that looks like. It just looks differently. You go through, like, you go through the steps, you go through, the anger, the why, you go through a different type of grief. And you don't think further on than they're gone. Um, and that's it. Um, but then I got saved. I'm it was about the year after my mom passed. Um, a year and a half or so after my mom passed, I got saved. And and then the year after that, I wrote the book. And I realized as I was writing the book and I was grieving all over again because it made me realize that I don't know where she went because my mother was not saved as far as I knew. Now, I had spoken about this a few other times in previous episodes, in my Evergreen catalog. But, when she was in the hospital, she did talk to a pastor there. And I don't know what that looked like. I didn't dive into it then. I wasn't saved, so I didn't really think much of it. And I just thought, oh, okay, good. I'm glad you got some peace in your life, or, I'm glad it helped. And she didn't tell me much about it. She just said it was a really good conversation, and I'm really glad I spoke to a pastor. And I was like, I'm really happy you spoke to somebody. And we were my great grandmother was very Catholic, and I'm not a big fan of the Catholic religion, and I'm sorry for anybody who's Catholic out there. I just have my own, things with the Catholic religion. Um, but um, with that being said, you grieve differently because once you're saved, you realize that people who are not saved, you don't know where they're going. And I know that sounds very harsh, and I'm sorry. But if you've been with me for a long time, I don't sugarcoat anything. Because I think the truth matters, and I say it with so much love, and I want to be honest with everybody, and I want the truth to be, I want the truth to be out there, and I want to make sure that we don't hide things from each other. And I want to make sure that we make sure that we are aware, that awareness is key, that we are aware of what is happening and what the Bible says. And the Bible is very clear. But again, I don't know, only God knows what's in my mother's heart on the day of her passing. So I actually don't know. I don't know. You know, Jesus has mercy and grace, and he, you know, she could be up there waiting for me. I don't know. I don't know. But you grieve differently from a non-saved person to a saved person. And that's what it was like. I grieved all over again when I wrote the book, because it made me, it was like a brick hit me when I realized that I don't know. And I wept for days. And I'm gonna try not to burst into absolute tears right now. I remember driving back and forth while I was writing this book. During the process, I would drive to work and from work, just weeping and crying out to God to hear an answer, which I knew I was never going to get, to give me an answer on where my mother was. And then I realized during the writing process, as I was going through the grief, because I had to realize this was grief, which actually leads me into the next what I wrote as I kept writing. So as I was crying out to God, to Jesus, and weeping and begging for him to let me know where she was, I kept writing. I just kept writing because I had to trust the process. I had to trust the process of grief because I knew it wasn't linear. I knew it wasn't one direction. Grief does not go in one direction. Grief is circular. I knew that. I knew that grief doesn't go in one direction, stop, and then you're done. Grief, you're never done with grief. I knew that because otherwise I had already grieved my mother's passing. But here I was again, grieving her all over as if it had just happened that day. And I was doing it as if she had just passed. And I mean, look at me now. I mean, I still grieve her because I don't know. So, so I kept writing, and I got to a line that said, and as I was writing, I was reading scripture, I was reading different parts of the Bible, and I got to a line where it said, where Jesus was at Lazarus' tomb, and it said, if Jesus wept. And I think it broke me. Because if Jesus can weep for his best friend, for somebody he loved, even though he had the power and he knew what was going to happen, he stood at that tomb and he cried. He didn't rush and fix it. He didn't tell Mary and Martha that everything would be fine. He didn't over explain. He didn't do any of those things. He was just present in the moment. And he wept. And he wept with them. And I thought, you know what? Maybe that's just what I need. Maybe that's why this is the process I need to go through. And I knew he was with me. And because I'm not much of a cry. I mean, you guys have seen me cry a few times now on camera. Um, but when I grieved my mother as a secular person, I didn't cry. Probably as much as I thought I was going to. I've cried for her a lot more as a Christian. But reading that line that Jesus wept and reading about him at Lazarus' tomb and how he didn't just fix it, even though he knew he could and he would, broke me. Because I knew at that point that I didn't need answers. I needed to trust him because he was with me. He was with me in my grief. He would always be with me in my grief. And it was okay. And I had to just trust. And that's it. And then I got to the point in my book where I wrote, grief is not a lack of faith. It means you've loved deeply. So I think this is where I came around to, because I was like, why am I still grieving? This has been so long and I'm so tired of crying. And, and I, when I say grief isn't linear, that's the realization, right? Because we hear people say, oh, just get over it, or why are you still grieving, or it's been so long, or people get tired of people grieving, or but grief isn't linear. Grief doesn't have a timeline. Grief is proof that you've loved deeply. And it's not a lack of faith. And I know somebody needs to hear that today. Because we've always been told the opposite. And your tears are not a sign of weakness. They are an evidence of love. And I wish somebody would have told me that earlier because I was so afraid of crying and grieving my mother. And I remember when I first grieved her before I became Christian, my grief came out as anger. I was angry all the time. Um, I gave myself less than 5 minutes, I think, to cry for her. And when I did cry, I think it was only in private for a few minutes. Never cried in front of people because I didn't want to come across as weak. If I had to do anything, I was angry, I was stoic. But tears aren't weakness. They're a sign that you loved somebody. And sometimes instead of trying to hold it together, it's okay to fall apart. We just need to do it in the right direction. And that's into God's arms. There's another line in the book. That goes along with in the right direction. It says faith doesn't mean you're not crying, it means you're crying in God's direction. Um, so once I got saved, sometimes I know we struggle with silence. Um, there's a line in the book where I wrote, God's silence is not the same as his absence. And I think that one took me a little bit to understand because um, we, I think we misunderstand silence sometimes because we're taught by society the silent treatment, right? We're conditioned in the secular world that silent treatment is bad, which it is. We use it as a weapon. We've weaponized silence. You know, if somebody gives us a silent treatment, it's a weapon. It's bad. Um, because silence is distance. But for God, silence isn't that. It's not the same. It doesn't mean he's absent. It means he's sitting with you. He's never absent from us. And that one took me. It took me a little bit to see the difference. Another line I wrote further in the book, closer to the end, I think. Tears are the language of the soul when words won't come out. And God is fluent in it. He really is. And I know I said this earlier. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. So it doesn't matter if it just happened, if it happened a month ago, if you've lost someone 6 months ago. It doesn't matter. Grief doesn't follow a time. I mean, I still grieve. You know, it's not as, I don't know if it's not as much, but I still grieve. When I talk about my mom, you know, I still cry, you know, I still hurt for her because I don't know, but it looks differently now. Um, it's different now than it did before. But I recognize that my tears, I don't want to just brush them away. Like before, I used to be ashamed of my tears that I was still grieving my mom after all this time, that years and years later, I'd be ashamed of it. I'd be apologizing for it. But I don't now. Now I know because my tears are proof that I loved her. Why should I be ashamed of that? She was my mother. Of course I loved her. Yeah, we had our ups and downs and we had our hard times and we weren't besties. You know, but at the end of the day, she was my mom. So I loved her and she mattered to me. And that's what these tears mean. That's it. And they don't mean I'm failing. They don't mean I'm broken or there's something wrong with me. And that's okay. And it may take years for me to stop crying when I talk about her. And I may never stop crying when I talk about her. And that's okay too. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And no matter where you are in your grief, be okay with it. Just don't let it stop you from living. Because That's not what God wants either. So, if you're in grief right now, I'm not going to tell you it gets easier. But I am going to tell you this. God's going to meet you in the places where you are right now. He's going to meet you in the quiet ones, the messy ones, the weeping ones, the ones where you don't have words, where you're just silent. Because He knows it all. He knows everything. So, stay with it. Know that God's with you, even if you can't hear Him. I know this episode was a little longer. I know it might have been a little heavier. But I think it was worth it. If you wanted to reach out to me, if you want to go a little deeper with this, you know how to reach me. The show notes has all the links. Otherwise, I think we're good for now. I think we can end it here. Have a good day, guys.